upstairs on that Sunday the 30th. Also, we really enjoy ice cream and strawberries. If you would help out with the cost of that, please see Sharon and kick in towards that, and that would be very much appreciated. I think those are the most important things. We do have a lot of things to pray for, but we'll hit that after Brother Nathan has given us devotion, so we'll hold on that for now. Any other announcements we need to know about right now? Brother Nathan.
Good evening. All right, let's go ahead and turn in our Bibles to Proverbs chapter 9. We've got chapter 8. And take a look at Proverbs chapter 9 tonight. We'll go ahead and read through all of Proverbs chapter 9, and then we'll open in prayer. Proverbs chapter 9, starting in verse 1. Wisdom has built her house. She has hewn out her 7 pillars. She has prepared her food. She has mixed her wine. She has also set her table. She has sent out her maidens. She calls from the tops of the heights of the city. Whoever is naive, let him turn in here. To him who lacks understanding, she says, come, eat of my food and drink of the wine I have mixed. Forsake your folly and live, and proceed in the way of understanding. He who corrects a scoffer gets dishonor for himself, and he who reproves a wicked man gets insults for himself. Do not reprove a scoffer, or he will hate you. Reprove a wise man, and he will love you. Give instruction to a wise man, and he will be still wiser. Teach a righteous man, and he will increase his learning. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. For by me your days will be multiplied, and years of life will be added to you. If you are wise for yourself, and if you scoff, you alone will bear it. The woman of folly is boisterous. She is naive and knows nothing. She sits at the doorway of her house, on a seat by the high places of the city, calling to those who pass by, who are making their paths straight. Whoever is naive, let him turn in here. And to him who lacks understanding, she says, stolen water is sweet, and bread eaten in secret is pleasant. But he does not know the dead are there, that her guests are in the depths of Sheol. Let's open in prayer. Not close in prayer. I hope we're not closing in prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for this day. Thank you for all that you've done for us. Thank you for your word, and thank you for the opportunity that we have to spend some time in it. I pray that you would help us to use this opportunity, this time, to be an encouragement to one another, that as we think of prayer requests, as we think of praises, that we would be doing so in a way that is pleasing to you and is trusting in you, relying on you. And I pray that you would help us to have a blessed evening together. In your name we pray. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, Proverbs chapter 9. And do most of you have Proverbs 9 printed off in a print-off with a pen? Does anyone need one? All out. I didn't make enough, did I? I didn't make enough. Fail. That thing about messing up. Yeah. All right. So, before we get into tonight's lesson, notice we looked last week at wisdom, right? And there was, as we were looking around verse 22 and on, the Lord possessed me at the beginning of his way, before his works of old, from everlasting I was established, from the beginning of the earliest times of the earth. And we talked about how wisdom was present, God's use of wisdom in creation. And there we kind of talked about, well, could this be Jesus? And I had said, no, it's not Jesus. I couldn't remember why. Now, I want you to look and then I want you to tell me the answer, okay, why it can't be Jesus. All right. When there's references to God and Jesus, is Jesus masculine or feminine? Masculine is male, okay? Now, when we're talking about wisdom, let's look at chapter 9, verse 1. Wisdom has built. All right, so that's the reason why we can say surely that wisdom is not actually, it's not Jesus. It's because it's in the feminine form. And so God, Jesus, they're not feminine. So that's that's why we know it's not Jesus. All right. So does everyone have a sheet of paper now? Thank you, Pastor. All right. So I want you to take your pen, and we're going to divide this chapter 9 into 3 sections. So we're going to make little brackets starting on verse 1, and we're going to go to verse 6. Okay? Little bracket, verses 1 through 6. That's one section. Okay? Now, verses 7 through 12 are another section. And then verses 13 to the end, verse 18, are a third section. And I don't know if you picked it up. It's sometimes easy to miss it the first time you read it through. But if you look at it, you'll notice that there's actually 2 different comparison and contrasts that are given. The first comparison and contrast, we only get the first part in verses 1 through 6. We have wisdom, okay? So go ahead and write wisdom next to that bracket. And then the last bracket down at the bottom, we have folly. F-O-L-L-Y, I think I spelled it right. Okay? And then in the middle, we have this comparison and contrast between someone who is a scoffer and someone who is a wise person, and the difference when you correct them or reprove. All right? So first of all, we have wisdom. So in verses 1 through 6, we have wisdom. Wisdom has built her house. She has hewn out her 7 pillars. Now, as I did some reading, did some research, as far as the significance of 7, well, we can say 7 is the number of God. But as far as specifically what is this referring to, it could be the 7 days of creation, a kind of a correlation between that. But the idea is that wisdom has built her house, she has prepared it, and she's prepared food. And so the other thing that when we're looking at chapter 9 of Proverbs is it's actually kind of like a summation or a conclusion of the first section of the book of Proverbs. So we've been talking about wisdom. There's been a lot of what we call personification, where wisdom is being described as a person, even though wisdom is not a person. And also folly is being described as a person as well. And there's this comparison and contrast given between the two. And we've seen that some, and now chapter 9 kind of gives a brief synopsis or an overview of what we've looked at so far in chapter 1 through 8. So we have wisdom. Wisdom has prepared herself. She has gotten things prepared, and she is welcoming anyone to come and eat, to dine with her. And you have the option, here is wisdom, you have the option, an opportunity to obtain wisdom. You are welcome to come. And it is interesting, she sends out her maidens, she calls from the tops of the heights of the city, whoever's naive, let him in, turn him here. Now, we've looked earlier, so if you turn back just a page to chapter 8, and this is kind of like a recall from chapter 8, starting in verse 1, does not wisdom call and understanding lift up her voice on the tops of the heights, beside the ways where the paths meet, she takes her stand. Beside the gates, at the opening of the city, at the entrance of the doors, she cries out. So we have kind of this summary, or already seen a little bit of connections from earlier in the book of Proverbs. And so wisdom is saying, I am prepared for those of you who lack understanding, come. And there is an invitation, and the invitation is open to anyone or everyone, either one. But then as we move to chapter 9, verse 7, we have, he who corrects a scoffer gets dishonor for himself, and he who reproves a wicked man gets insults for himself. Who's seen this? Where someone, you say, hey, let me help you, or you've seen someone else come along, they're being gentle, they're not being, is it hard to receive instruction from someone who's being a know-it-all? It can be, yes. All right, but even someone who's coming very gently, very graciously saying, here, let me show you, and someone, oh, I got it figured out, and they'll just keep doing their own thing, right? And they don't want to receive instruction. I mean, we've never done anything like that, right? I'll figure it out, thanks. All right, so a scoffer, what's interesting about a scoffer is someone who not only is deciding to head away from instruction, but actually ridicules those who follow instruction and ridicules those who are giving instruction, right? I believe it's 2 Peter chapter 3. Gives a, I'll have to look, hold on. Go back to 2 Peter. I think I've got go ahead and go back to 2 Peter. Keep your finger in Proverbs, so we'll be right back. No, I might have gotten that wrong. 2 Peter chapter 2. Chapter 2. And we have, starting in verse 10, through verses 22, we have this description of what scoffers are like. People who are not wanting to receive instruction. And interestingly, so starting in verse 10, and especially those who indulge the flesh in its corrupt desires and despise authority. All right? Daring, self-willed, they do not tremble when they revile angelic majesties. Whereas angels who are greater in might and power do not bring a reviling judgment against them before the Lord. Kind of sad. If you keep going, verse 14, having eyes full of adultery and never ceased from sin, enticing unstable souls, having a heart trained in greed, accursed children. And then if you keep going down, verse 18, for speaking out arrogant words of vanity, they entice by fleshly desires, by sensuality, those who barely escape from the ones who live in error, promising them freedom while they themselves are slaves of corruption. For by what a man is overcome, by that he is enslaved. So here's these scoffers. They're making fun of those who are trying to give instruction. They don't want to receive instruction. In fact, they ridicule those who are trying to give instruction. But then we continue on, and do not reprove a scoffer or he will hate you, verse 8 of chapter 9. Reprove a wise man and he will love you. Now, does that mean being reproved or do any of us like to be told we're wrong? Really? It's uncomfortable. You're like, oh, I messed up. And it can be either embarrassing, humbling, right? But at the same time, have you ever had to come to someone and say, hey, I don't know if you realize this, but you did this, and whether this is what you're intending or not, this is what happened. Welcome, come on in. And they receive it, and they say, well, They willingly receive the instruction that they're given. And they thank you for it. Well, that's a wise person. That's showing wisdom. Give instruction to a wise man, and he will be still wiser. So, can wisdom be gained or increased? We've actually looked earlier. Remember the fear of the Lord. Actually, let's look here. What's the next thing that we see? Give instruction to a wise man, and he will be still wiser. Teach a righteous man, and he will increase his learning. What's the next verse? Chapter 9, verse 11. Verse 10. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Now, is that it's just there because it's there, or was that put there intentionally? It was there intentionally, right? So we have a scoffer. Do scoffers have the fear of the Lord? No. Okay. But a wise man, remember, is the beginning of wisdom. Oh. Interesting. And the knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. All right, verse 11. For by me your days will be multiplied, and years of life will be added to you. Who's the me? Wisdom, okay? All right. If you are wise for yourself, and if you scoff, you alone will bear it. Okay? But then as we come to the next section, so we have those who receive instruction, the wise man. We have those who reject instruction, those who scoff at it. And now we've seen this contrast. So there's a wise person, the scoffer, and this is kind of like the center of the sandwich, and like the ham and cheese, and we have the bread on either side. And on one side we have wisdom, bookends. We can use bookends. We'll use bookends, right? Proverbs chapter 9, verses 1 through 6 is wisdom. That would be the one who receives instruction, right? The one who hears what has been said. And remember, chapter 9 is kind of like a summary of what's been said so far. So receiving, being willing to hear what has been said so far. And those who are unwilling to receive instruction. And then we're given the woman of folly is boisterous. So loud, rowdy, careless, not really caring what goes on. She is naive and knows nothing. Now, I think it's rather interesting because naive kind of gives the same idea as knows nothing, or sometimes it can be either intentional naivety or unintentional, but she's foolish, right? She sits at the doorway of her house. Now, does this sound similar to someone else? To wisdom, right? This sounds kind of similar. On a seat by the high places of the city, calling to those who pass by, who are making their paths straight. Whoever is naive, let him turn in here. And to him who lacks understanding, she says, stolen water is sweet, and bread eaten in secret is pleasant. All right, so what is a stolen water and bread eaten in secret? Well, I do remember I've heard, like my mom said, hey, she showed me a book when she was growing up. She was reading a book about just, it was dieting, different things like that. And when you're being secretive about what you eat, it's pleasant, but it comes back to bite you. You're being secretive. Well, okay, maybe you can use that, but actually there's more going on here than just that. So I want you to keep your finger here. And we're going to go back to Proverbs chapter 5. Proverbs chapter 5. And Proverbs chapter 5 and Proverbs chapter 7 kind of talk about similar things. And earlier in Proverbs chapter 5, we have warnings against lust, about the strange woman, those who would try to encourage you or entice you to sin sexually. And we have in verse 15, starting in verse 15, drink water from your own cistern and fresh water from your own well. Okay, water again. Should your springs be dispersed among the stream of water in the streets, let them be yours alone and not for strangers with you. Okay, interesting. Let your fountain be blessed, still water metaphor, and rejoice in the wife of your youth. All right, let's continue. As a loving hind and a graceful doe, let her breast satisfy you at all times. Be exhilarated always with her love. For why should you, my son, be exhilarated with an adulteress and embrace the bosom of a foreigner? For the ways of the man are before the eyes of the Lord, and he watches all his paths. All right, so we have this water metaphor, drinking water from your own cistern, drinking water from your own well, having to do with fidelity in marriage, actually. And so the woman folly is saying stolen waters is sweet. It's a rush. It's exciting. But it's foolishness. It's folly. But that's what our world says today. You spend much time in the world and you don't have to intentionally try to pay attention. And it's everywhere it's glorified of sexual illicitness. And one of the categories, one of the ways in which folly is shown is saying, hey, this is good. It's pleasant. It's enjoyable for me. I enjoy this. You should do this. This is okay. Sexual immorality is okay. It's not really immoral. It's sweet. And it's putting a spin on it. It's twisting what's true. It's saying that adultery or sexual immorality is a good thing. And does not our world do that today? And then bread eaten in secret is pleasant. Now, the idea of bread, if you very possibly could have something to do with wealth, riches, having stuff, going back to earlier in Proverbs. And so the woman folly is pretty much saying, or folly is saying, everything is like the anti of what wisdom is. Wisdom is saying, this is how you are to live. You are to be drinking water from your own cistern. Drink water from your own well. Be faithful in marriage. Receive instruction. Fear the Lord. And folly, foolishness, is the opposite of that. It's the world we live in. Let's pay attention. Should the folly or the foolishness of the world surprise us? No. Those who do not have Christ, those who do not have Christ living in their lives, should we expect something that they are not really headed for right now? Why are they being so foolish? Why is this something that they're glorifying? Why are they glorifying foolishness? Why are they glorifying illicit sex? Why are they glorifying gaining money by illegitimate means? Why are they doing these things? Should it surprise us that they do that? Now, What are we pursuing? So, as we go through our week, it shouldn't surprise us when the world acts foolishly. At the same time, how are we to live? We're to fear the Lord, beginning of wisdom. Fear the Lord is not terror, remember? It's not panic. It's not... It's understanding, though, that God has authority over my life. He has the right to tell me what to do. And he has not only the right, but also the ability to follow through and potentially make life uncomfortable for me when I don't obey him. That's what I've got for you tonight. Isn't God good? We don't have to guess what he expects from us. And isn't God good that he shows us there's a difference? All right. Prayer requests?